If you thought you knew how to play FPL, think again because the rules have changed. Welcome to FPL Mate, my name is Dan, and yes, with some major overhauls to the way FPL is going to be played in 2025-26, we're going to have to adjust our strategies just a little bit. Maybe that's putting it lightly. And the first thing I want to talk about today is this defensive action rule change that is coming into FPL. So I'm going to talk you through how this is going to work for the new season, and then we're going to talk about some players, some midfielders who will now be picking up points for defensive actions. Yes, defensive midfielders are so back. And also we're going to talk about some defenders who are also going to be picking up some points as well. So there's lots to talk about today. We're going to go through it all, not just how the rule works, but also some really useful FPL tips and player pick tips that we can use going into the new season. So let's have a look at these rules first of all. So what is going on here, guys? So defensive actions for defensive contributions will grant points. They really will. So these are the things that are defined but as defensive actions according to FPL. So we've got blocks, tackles, interceptions, and clearances. These are your main ones. And then we also have ball recoveries, which are going to apply to midfielders and forwards only. So blocks, tackles, interceptions, clearances are for defenders, but all of those plus recoveries are also going to apply to our midfielders and forwards. It's mostly going to be midfielders though, guys. I can't lie. Forwards don't typically make too many defensive actions. I mean, that makes sense. They're forwards, right? So what's going to happen is if you get 10 defensive contributions, 10 of these defensive actions as a defender, you are going to get 2 points for your defender, 2 additional points for your defender. However, for midfielders and forwards, they're going to need to get 12 defensive contributions to get their 2 points for the game. And that is due to them also having access to those recovery points as well. Goalkeepers are not counted in any of this, not that they really would pick up these kind of points anyway, but defensive contribution points are capped at 2 points per match for all players. So once you've hit your 10, it doesn't even matter if you've gone to a million defensive contributions as a defender in a match, you are capped at 2 points. So you can kind of think about it as like a bonus points system, but specifically for those more defensive-minded players who may benefit more from this new rule. So hopefully that makes sense, guys. Let's have a look at the kind of players who really will benefit from this rule change. So what I've got for you here, guys, is the raw data. Yes, guys, honestly, I have spent hours and hours and hours today compiling this huge spreadsheet, which has all of this data in. So we can have a look at which players are kind of performed on this metric last season. So we can kind of get some ideas of how it's going to work, how it's going to benefit certain players. And what we can see here is particularly midfielders seem to get a lot more of these defensive actions per 90. You can see at the top here, players like Casemiro, Viper, Christie, Anderson, Bentancur, Yarmouk, Norgard, Lerma, Andre at Wolves as well. Plenty of players here, but we're looking at a lot of midfielders. And that kind of makes sense because midfielders have to get 12 actions in order to get their 2 points. It kind of makes sense for a lot of these kind of midfielders to actually be at the top of this list. So you got to remember here, guys, we do see some defenders here like Howson from last season, Morato, Bednarek, Murillo. These players, they need to get 10. But obviously the midfielders need to get 12. And what is super interesting here is there's actually a lot of players here that would get these 2 points gifted to them pretty much every single game, kind of on average, or at least most games. So that is going to be really super important. So looking through this list, you can see there are some trends. We're looking at defensive midfielders who previously in FPL, I mean, I think we all remember the days of Kante in FPL and how brilliant he was as a football player, but he was about as useful as a chocolate teapot when it came to FPL. If Kante was playing in the Premier League right now, he would absolutely be getting those FPL points like crazy. Born too soon, I'm afraid. N'Golo Kante, no points for you. But we can still look forward to a lot of these players. So defensive midfielders, they are finally useful. They are going to be able to get those extra 2 points. It's not going to be revolutionary. We're not going to see mega scores from defensive midfielders typically can happen occasionally, but because these players don't score too many goals, don't get too many assists, typically we are going to see them get a few extra points. If they're nice cheap players, they can really supplement your squad, where previously these players were kind of ignored. But they're not going to be captain material, they're not going to score mega points or anything like that. Another trend we see here, before we kind of deep it a little bit more and kind of look at some individual players that are actually going to be useful for the new season. Another trend we can kind of see here is we see a lot of these players kind of maybe playing for some lower down the table teams, or at least playing for those teams last season. And I know this sounds super obvious, but the teams and the players who are defending more will have more defensive actions. So I know a lot of people will think, okay, who are the best defensive players in the Premier League? You're looking at Van Dijk, you're looking at Saliba or Gabriel, maybe players like that. Ruben Dias. These are great defenders. But are they going to be picking up defensive points? Maybe not necessarily, because the amount of defending they actually have to do is less. So those newly promoted teams, we see plenty of these, Ndidi, Phillips, Bednarak there on this list. Players from teams who have been relegated, they are going to appear on this list. So you would imagine that Leeds, Sunderland, Burnley, these are also going to be teams that do pick up these kind of points. Not saying that you should pick players from those teams, but it is food for thought for sure. But yeah, it's more geared towards kind of bottom half of the table team. So that's just something to be aware of. These are going to be players who have the ability to pick up defensive points. Probably not going to get too many goals or assists, particularly lower down the table where their teams are scoring less goals and, they're not even the goal scoring players in those lower down the table teams. So enough waffle, let's start to trim this down a little bit. So I've trimmed this down to FPL relevant data. So I've removed all of the players who are kind of have left the Premier League, essentially, or at least I hope I've got most of them at this point in my spreadsheet. You are just seeing a snippet of the top part of the spreadsheet, just so I can show you the top performers in these kind of categories. But again, we're looking at players like Casemiro, Viper, Christie are going to be at the top of this list. One player who looks really interesting actually is Moises Caicedo, because he is a player who is pretty much nailed on when a lot of these players are not nailed on in their team. They're not going to play every single game. But Caicedo, 15th place on this list for those current Premier League players. Really nice. 12.37 defensive actions per 90. Means that as long as he's playing 90 minutes, you're going to expect him to pick up those extra 2 points every game. So 2 points for playing. Maybe an extra point if Chelsea get a clean sheet, so that's up to 3 points, plus an additional 2 points for those defensive actions. Going to bring him up to 5 points per game. Really, really nice. We're going to see him average 3 to 5 points every single game. Throw in a goal there, and we are looking at a really nice score from Caicedo. He does have a shot in his locker. We know that for sure. So if Caicedo is coming in at a reasonably cheap price in FPL, he's definitely a player that we can suddenly consider for our FPL teams, which previously we would not really been able to do that before. So speaking of minutes, I have trimmed this list down even more to kind of really be a little bit more harsh on the minutes, to really focus on those players who are playing regularly, those first choice players. So you can see some new names coming onto this list now. You see Caicedo moving up the list. But again, we are seeing mostly players from those lower down the table, mid-table downwards kind of teams here. We're seeing Bournemouth, Nottingham Forest, Brentford, Crystal Palace, Wolves, Brighton, and maybe a little bit of Everton in there as well. But these are the midfielders. I want to talk about defenders next. We know this is how the defenders are going to work, but I think the big points really are going to be from defenders, because with defenders, we're not just looking at those defensive action points, but we're looking at clean sheet points as well. We're looking at players who were already super useful in FPL, and some of them will be picking up even more points. Remember, defenders only need 10 of these actions, not 12. So let's have a look at them. And yeah, like I say, this is where things get super interesting. So we're looking at defenders who are regular starters for their teams into the new season, and looking at those with high amounts of defensive actions. We have 4 players here who regularly, average over 10 per 90. And those players are Murillo at Nottingham Forest. We've got Tarkowski at Everton, Lacroix at Crystal Palace, and Pinnock at Brentford there as well. Also got the likes of Chris Richards, Anderson, Branthwaite, Collins, Mavropanos, a little bit lower down the list as well. So if we're kind of trying to look at these nailed players for the Premier League teams, we're looking at certainly a lot of Nottingham Forest players are appearing on this list. We've got Murillo, Nico Williams, a fullback, yes, Milenkovic there as well. Super interesting, and I think this is definitely starting to build an idea of maybe some of the cheaper defenders that might be good. So 4.5 million defenders, maybe 5 million defenders. A lot of these players on this list are going to be within that price category, and we could see that these players could even outscore a lot of those premium defenders that we were previously used to because of all of these defensive actions that they are performing per game. But I know what you guys are thinking. You want those consistent clean sheets. So let's have a look at the top 6 Premier League teams from last season. Which defenders are kind of putting up some really good numbers here, and how do they rank among the overall defender kind of database here? So we see Van Dijk. He is the #1 guy. If you're looking for a defender from a top team who is going to regularly get clean sheets, has all of the defensive data that suggests they could get some additional points, and also maybe a bit of attacking threat as well, occasional header. Van Dijk looks really strong right now, and if he's coming in at 6.5 million, I have to say I will be very tempted to go for him. So Liverpool centre-backs in particular seem to really benefit from this defensive actions data. These are players that are called upon to perform defensive actions quite frequently compared to some of the other bigger teams. We also see Newcastle in a similar vein here. Share and Lewis Hall, again an attacking fullback, are performing pretty high on this list. Now, these kind of players are not going to pick up your defensive actions points every single game, but with these kind of numbers, you can imagine that they would do it with reasonable regularity, enough to give you some, pleasant bonus points from time to time. So I don't think the top 6 defenders are now gone, not to be considered anymore, but they're certainly the cheaper defenders. Those defenders from lower down the table are certainly going to be more useful than ever. There may be some gems in here. I'm looking at Van Dijk. I'm looking at Lewis Hall. Maybe even Gavardio here as well. One other player I do want to mention on this list is Marc Cucurella as a potential shout, because we know he is a fullback. He has great attacking qualities. He does pop up with the occasional goal. We've seen that over the last year. Assists as well, less frequent, but still he can get assists there as well, and his data here is actually pretty good for those defensive actions, so I'm pretty impressed with him. Of course, Chelsea have a phenomenal start to the season in terms of fixtures as well, so Marc Cucurella is definitely another player on my watch list from these kind of top 6 teams. So the final thing I want to talk about here is Arsenal. So Gabriel and Saliba, these Arsenal defenders, the clean sheet machines, everyone was talking about them last season as great FPL picks. You pretty much had to have an Arsenal defender in your team at all times last season. Well, these are not really players who are going to be picking up many defensive actions points. So this makes me think, okay, since goalkeepers aren't really affected by this, we want goalkeepers just for clean sheets and those save points, of course. Does that mean that if we're going for an Arsenal defensive FPL asset, are we looking at someone like Raya instead? Is that what we want to do? We want to go for Raya as our premium Arsenal goalkeeper, and then we can spend maybe a little bit less money in our defenses as we try and pick up those defensive action points. That's certainly something that I'm thinking about right now. But certainly the stocks in the big defenders are dropping, with the exception of maybe a couple of players that we have mentioned today, which is super curious indeed. Now, I wasn't planning on talking about this just yet, but guys, if you do want to get access to all of the data that we showed in this video, we've got a spreadsheet with all of the players from last season's Premier League. There are hundreds and hundreds of rows of data that I have compiled over the course of today. If you want to get access to the full sheets, you can become a member of the channel at the starting 11 tier or above. You are going to get access to all of those data sheets. But yeah, I wasn't really planning on talking about memberships just yet. I haven't kind of fully launched the memberships on this channel, but the data sheets are available to those premium members already. If you are subscribed, or if you're thinking about subscribing, you want access to this data, you want to check out all of the players rather than just the few that I've selected out today. And one more thing before we leave. One more rule change came into FPL today. At time of recording, we are getting 2 of each chip for the rest of the season. Yes, guys, 2 free hits, 2 bench boosts, 2 wildcards. Well, that already happened. And it's going to work the same as wildcards did. So you use one, you have to use one of them before game week 20, and you can use the other version, the other one, from game week 20 onwards. So that's going to bring up so many more strategies, but guys, that deserves its own video, so we're not going to deep it right now. But I would love to hear from you guys. What do you think about the rule changes in FPL? Defensive midfielders are finally here to stay in FPL. Cheap defenders are going to be absolute beasts. Let me know what you think about that. And of course, if you want to talk about the chip changes as well, 2 times each chip, then yeah, I would love to hear your guys' thoughts and opinions on that one as well. But that's going to be it from me today, guys. If you want to watch my video on prices, you can check it out right here. We are going to be back for plenty more FPL videos in the coming weeks, so make sure you subscribe, stick around, like if you enjoyed, really appreciate it, and I'll see you later, mates. Bye-bye.